Okay, so we're going to solve this radical equation. So your goal is to get the radical alone on one side of the equation. So I'm going to add 3 to both sides. So I've achieved my first goal, to get the radical alone. Next, I want to raise both sides to whatever the root is. And in our case, the root is 2. If you don't see a root, the root is 2. It's assumed. But whatever that index is will be what you're going to raise both sides to. Whenever you have a radical and you raise it to its index, you're left with just the radicand, which is the stuff below the radical sign. And on the right, 3 squared is 9. Now, we want to solve this, and so we're going to subtract 7 from both sides. And we're going to divide by 6, negative 6. And I'm going to h is equal to 2, 6, which is negative, and we can simplify that as negative 1/3. And I could check that by putting it into the equation. And I will get 2 plus 7, which we know is 9. So the square root of 9 is 3. And 3 minus 3 is 0. So I know that this is a true solution. I have not created an extraneous solution. Our next problem asks us to simplify this. Now, warning, the biggest mistake I see people make on these problems is they see these parentheses, right? And they think, oh, multiplication. This is not multiplication. In the middle here is a minus sign. This is subtraction. Okay? So we're going to treat it exactly the same way as if these were i's or x's. Okay? So in that case, I would want to make sure I distribute the minus. So this will become minus 15 minus 2i. And I'd look for like terms. I can definitely combine those numbers. That'll be negative 24. And then negative 16i and minus 2i will be negative 18i. Now make sure your answer is in the form of real plus imaginary. So a plus bi. So ours is, and we're fine. Now this next problem is multiplication. Okay, I have 2 parentheses are right next to each other, so I'm just going to distribute just as if these were x's. They're just variables. So I'm going to get 144 minus 48i plus 48i, and then minus 16i squared. Okay, so use whatever method you like for multiplying a binomial times a binomial. Now I'm going to look for like terms, and I have 144, and this, a minus 48 plus a 48 will be 0. Now I must memorize before I go on the test that I squared is equal to negative 1, and I must memorize that the square root of negative 1 is equal to I. So these are things you're going to want to memorize before you walk in. So wherever there's an I squared, I'm going to replace that with negative 1. So I have 144 plus 16, which would be 160. Now, our next equation asks us to solve a quadratic. You could try to factor it. It's not going to be factorable, but you could try, and if it were, you could use factoring. I'm going to go ahead and try the quadratic equation, which you must memorize. So a negative boy couldn't make up his mind if he should go to this really radical party. Because he was square, he missed out on meeting 4 awesome chicks. And the party was all over by 2 a.m. So you have to figure out whatever method works for you to memorize the quadratic equation. The quadratic formula. And there are many songs and little memory tricks on the internet you can just Google. But once you have it memorized, I recommend replacing every variable with a parentheses. A set of parentheses. That way, when you put in your A and your B and your C, you don't screw up the signs. So A is always a number in front of the square, B is the number and the coefficient in front of the x, and C is always a constant by itself. So in our case, A is -5, B is 6, and C is 2. So I'm going to replace all those variables in our quadratic formula. So B is 6, and A is -5, and C is 2. So I have -6 plus or minus. I always simplify this discriminant. So that's going to be 36 plus 40, which would become 76. Okay? Our directions say do not use any decimal values. So you don't want to put this in your calculator. Instead, you want to just simplify it. So we know this is -6 over -10. And then the square root of 76 over -10. So I can simplify this. This is going to be 3/5. And then I need to make sure that I can't simplify 76. So let's just try the long way. That's going to be 2 and 38. And then 2 and 19. Well, I definitely see that I have a pair of 2's. So I can bring one out. So I have 2 square root of 19 over -10. So I can simplify this as 3/5 plus or minus 2 over 10 would become 1/5. So I can say the square root of 19 over 5. And I didn't put the negative because we're saying plus or minus. And so really the negative, it's not really necessary because of a plus times a negative would be a negative and a minus times a negative would be a plus. So I'm either way going to get a plus or minus. Okay, for this problem it asks if the parabola will be opening up or down. So we know that when a parabola is written in standard form, quadratic, we look at the A. The A is the number in front of the x squared. If A is positive people smile and the parabola opens up. If A is negative people frown and it opens down. So in our case, A is 17, which is positive, so it's going to open up. In the second case, A is negative, so it's going to open down.